Hello and welcome to another edition of On Our Terms, a video series by AIA Contract Documents. I am Jimmy Germano. I'm an attorney working with the AIA Contract Documents program based out of Washington, D.C. I am joined today by my colleague Mike Bomba, who is also an attorney working with the AIA Contract Documents program based out of Washington, D.C. Today we're going to be talking about the A201 section 3.12, which is shop drawings, product data, and samples. This is the second part of a two-part video that deals with this section. So if you haven't watched part one yet, we would suggest you hit pause, check out that part one. It's just a couple of minutes and walks through sections 312.1 through 312.9. And then this one is going to go into detail about 312.10, which is sort of the delegated design aspect of this section. It's important to remember that we can't provide legal advice, so this information is not provided as legal advice. The full disclaimer is going to be provided to you at the end of the presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike to talk about 312.10. Mike?
Thank you, Jimmy. Just to give you an idea of where we've been and why this section is being split up into two parts. It's a fairly dense section, and there's a lot to unpack in all of this. Jimmy has previously covered sections 312.1 through 312.9, which is a good overview of the shop drawing, product data, and samples process. And so I am going to be going over 312.10, which is essentially delegated design, even though it doesn't have a convenient title. And why is it in this section? Because the process of delegated design will be communicated back to the owner and the architect via the shop drawings process. So everything you learned about the shop drawing process in the previous video will still be applicable here, but now we're going to be focusing specifically on the 312.10 requirements in design delegation or delegated design, however you want to say it. So let's just start basically with what is it? What is design delegation? It's essentially a process where the owner and architect, through the contract documents, will delegate a portion of the project's design to the contractor. And it's been around for, it's probably been part of the construction process since the construction process started. In terms of the AIA documents, it was formalized in the 1997 version of the A201. And the language, while it's been tweaked, is largely consistent with what you see on the screen here. So 312.10 is the provision that begins to talk about the ability of the design delegation to occur. And while it's a permissive provision allowing for design delegation to happen, it's in many ways a protective provision as well, because it states, and this is the value of having a provision like this in the contract, it states that the contractor is not going to be required to provide professional services that would constitute architecture or engineering unless the services are specifically required in the contract documents for a portion of the work. And it goes on to add that the contractor is not going to be required to provide professional service in violation of applicable law. So while the overall section allows design delegation to happen, it certainly puts some requirements on there that can help and benefit the contractor to avoid having the obligation to provide professional services when the contract documents didn't specifically call for it. And that last sentence of 312.10 is important because there are certain design duties that cannot be delegated. For example, a structural engineer can't delegate the design of structural elements. In most jurisdictions, that is the case and should be the case. They are the structural engineer. They should be responsible for the overall structures in the project. So it's important to understand that as much as delegated design is allowed, there are parameters that the contract puts around it. So moving on to 312.10.1, this is really, well, actually, before we go here, I did want to mention, why would you even do design delegation? What's the value? The main reason for doing it is usually efficiency. If you think of certain items that are commonly the subject of delegated design, one of them is a curtain wall. And the design team could sit down and they could meticulously design every element of a curtain wall system, and it would take a long time. And the ultimate product would be a design that's not exactly consistent with any product or process that is out there. And so then the result would be that the contractor would get it. They need to find which system they're going to use that most closely resembles all the requirements. And then you'd go through an extensive shop drawing process to almost redesign and engineer the curtain wall system. So because the curtain wall is so product specific and manufacturer specific, there are many nuances that are purely related to the means and methods associated with the product that come in that impact the design. And so it's much more efficient to have the contractor, or in some instances the manufacturer, who's familiar with all those intricacies, do the design work. It's much more efficient for them to do it because they can take into account all of those intricacies in their design. You'll also see it maybe often in MEP work, some of the MEP work. And that's usually because the design and the fabrication are so closely related. It makes more sense to have the party who's responsible for the fabrication do the design work. So that kind of takes us into 3.12.10. Now that we know the why, 3.12.10.1 is really the how. So it's not like you can't just fully turn over the design responsibilities to the construction team. That's not how delegated design works. The owner and the architect certainly still have responsibilities. And their responsibilities are to provide all the performance and design criteria that the delegated design services of the contractor have to meet. And the contractor is going to be entitled to rely upon the adequacy and accuracy of that performance and design criteria provided in the contract documents. And then the owner and the architect are going to be entitled to rely upon the services and certifications and all of that are provided by the contractor's design professionals. I wanted to highlight some terms in 3.12.10.1, and that's performance and design criteria. You see it twice here, and this is discussing what it is that the owner and the architect are required to provide to the contractor. It's the performance and design criteria that set the parameters for the design services the contractor is going to provide. And there's an important difference between performance and design criteria. Design criteria are very specific. Usually they will say, a certain product has to be used, or perhaps they'll provide specific dimensions for a curtain wall to meet the overall design concept that the design team has come up with. And so there's really no flexibility, or there's very little flexibility with those specific items of the design criteria. Now, when you have a performance criteria, it's a little bit different. Usually what you'll have happen when the design team assigns a performance criteria is that they'll tell the contractor, these are the performance requirements that have to be met. If we're talking about an HVAC system, this is how much air has to be moved, things like that. And so how the contractor's design team gets to the performance is sort of in their discretion, but they have to meet the performance requirements. And what's also important is that the contractor is entitled to rely on that performance and design criteria. So in the instance of performance criteria, let's say that the design team indicates a certain wind load that the curtain wall has to be able to maintain, and the contractor provides a curtain wall design that meets that performance. If it turns out that the performance criteria was flawed in some way that the contractor was provided, that error is essentially owned by the owner and the architect. The contractor met the performance requirements, but if those performance requirements ultimately are flawed, it's not the contractor's responsibility. It's important to note that because we are talking about design services, the contractor is required to have all of those services provided by an appropriately licensed design professional. And that design professional is the one who's going to be signing and sealing all the drawings, all the calculations, specs, shop drawings, everything related to that design. As Jimmy went over in part one of this series, the architect still has a role because these are going to be submitted through shop drawings typically. And the architect is going to be reviewing all of the shop drawings. That doesn't mean, however, that they're taking ownership over the design. That our responsibility for the design still rests with the contractor and their licensed professional. But the architect is going to be reviewing the submittals for the limited purpose of checking for conformance with the information given and the design concept expressed in the contract documents. So it's very similar to the shop drawing type review that Jimmy discussed that the architect will take on. It's for consistency with the design concept expressed in the contract document. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on 3.12.10.2. There's not much here, but to the extent that contract documents require a design professional to certify that the work has been performed in accordance with the design criteria, the contractor is the one who's obligated to furnish those certifications to the architect. And with that, I think I've covered everything in 3.12.10. So Jimmy, please let me know if I missed anything, but otherwise I'll pass it back to you.
No, I don't think you missed anything. That was incredibly in-depth. Thanks. Really good analysis there of the delegated design aspect in section 312. If you want to learn more, you can at aicontracts.org/learn. You can also email us if you have questions about the content of a document, what it says, what document you should look into if you're starting a project. You can hit us up at docinfo@aia.org. If you have questions about the online service, so using our online software, you can submit those questions to docs tech support at aia.org, or you can always call the phone numbers that are on your screen. Earlier in the video, we referenced a disclaimer. Again, the full disclaimer here should show up on your screen shortly, and that's the one that really hammers home the idea that if you do have information, if you want information, if you want to seek out legal advice, the best thing to do is talk to an attorney licensed in your jurisdiction about the facts and circumstances at issue in your case. And again, the full disclaimer here is on your screen. So that's all we got. Thanks very much.
Thank you.